everyone says they want peace, financial freedom, stability, margin, a rich life. But I want to ask you something. Does your life feel peaceful? Does it feel peaceful? Because earning and peace are two completely different things. And this is something I personally had to learn. So welcome to the Rich Auntie Podcast. I'm your host and favorite Rich Auntie, Kia. And today we are talking about peace from a financial lens. So as a wealth and business strategist, we're going to talk financially today, and we're going to talk about how peace requires structure. And so we want all of these things in our lives, but we have to be more intentional. All right. So we measure success by income, revenue, growth, bigger months, bigger goals. And I know many of you are like, yeah, that's definitely how we measure success, because that's how we've been taught. When we get the big bonus, when we, get the paychecks, when we are able to increase our income, that is what we measure success by a lot of the times. Most of the time we look at it from a financial lens. And obviously success is more than that, and it's all based on your perspective. But most people look at it from a financial lens. It's like how much they make is their report card of life. It's like, if I'm making X amount of dollars, then I have an A plus in life. If I'm making, a lower amount, I have maybe like a B minus or C. And for some people, maybe they feel like they have an F, right? But that's how we've been taught for a long time to measure success based off of growth, based off of income, based off of, just what we have, all our material possessions and stuff like that. And income matters. I'm not saying that it doesn't, okay? Like, definitely it does. Absolutely. But income alone does not create stability. And therefore, you can make more money and you could still feel financially fragile or financially exposed. And so that's not a peaceful life. More income doesn't automatically mean that you're going to have a more peaceful life. And so we definitely need to look at those parameters, and we need to look at things a little bit different. I remember a season in my life when, my income increased. On paper, it looked good. I mean, I was banking it. Okay. More money coming in, bigger months, momentum, all of that stuff, and I still experience that today, but in a different way. Because internally at the time, I didn't feel more stable back then. I didn't feel calm, and I definitely felt exposed, financially exposed, right? And I realized it was because I wasn't reviewing my income. I wasn't reviewing my financial situation. I didn't review my bills. I didn't review my liquidity. I didn't clarify my allocation. I hadn't positioned my income intentionally. I was earning, but I wasn't structuring. And so that's when I realized something. Income isn't peace, positioning is. How you're positioned financially matters more than the income you have coming in. And like I said, income matters, but your positioning matters as well, because I work with many clients and I've seen it from people that make $30K a year to people that make well over $500,000 a year. Okay. So, and you would think that the person making over $500,000 would be more financially stable, but that's not always the case. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about your income and your wealth. Think about the positioning. How are you positioned? Are you positioned to handle anything that comes at you financially? And so peace is not emotional. And I know some of you are like, what do you mean, Kia? What do you mean? Peace is not emotional. Of course it is. When I feel great, I feel at rest. I feel at peace. Yeah, I get that. But that's more of a temporary state, right? Isn't it true that you can feel at peace one moment and in the next moment you could feel like you're in total chaos? And so it's fleeting, right? But that's a more state of being. What we're talking about today is structural peace. We're talking about peace that is designed, that is created from a financial lens. All right. So peace is structural. It requires design. Liquidity creates calm. If you're liquid, if you have cash, isn't it true? I know a lot of people talk about investing. Buy this stock, buy crypto, buy this, buy that. Yeah, those things are great. However, like, are you liquid? Do you have money in the bank? Do you have cash? At the end of the day, if everything went to hell and you needed to survive for a bit, like, are you good? Are you liquid? And so that's a part of creating peace for your life, right? Allocation creates clarity. When you know where your money is going, isn't it true that you feel more at peace? And when you're clear on things, ownership creates stability. So I'm always talking about ownership. For those of you who've known me for years, I stress this repeatedly all the time, right? And margin creates breathing room. When you have margin, you're able to make decisions from a place of calm and security versus making a place from desperation, and then you make decisions where you mess yourself up, right? So margins create breathing room. So if your income stopped tomorrow, would your life feel steady? Like, would you be at peace? Or would you be like, I would be running around crazy because I would not know what to do? And so let that land for you. Peace is not how much you make, it's how well you're positioned. So we're going to talk a lot about positioning, especially in the wealth table. So financial overwhelm doesn't always mean you're broke, okay? It often means you haven't reviewed your structure. When you feel financially overwhelmed, it's genuinely because you're not looking at anything. You're not reviewing anything. You're just going along your day. You're just going along your life as if, you have unlimited funds, or that you can just make decisions on a whim. And there are people that can do that, but most people, you have to put some thought behind it, right? It often means you haven't reviewed your structure. You have money coming in, but you have no allocation system. You have growth happening, but no separation between business and personal capital. And I see this all the time. And we need to separate those things, okay? They need to break up. Revenue increasing, but no liquidity buffer at all. And goals are expanding, but you don't have a capital map. Like, these things are very important. Overwhelm is usually a structural thing. It's because you're not looking at your structure. It's also not emotional, and it's not really personal, but it is definitely structural. And we're talking about from a financial standpoint. So peace is expensive, guys. Peace, you have to pay something for peace. And it's not because it costs money, but because it costs intention. Just like money, where you spend your intention matters as well. Where your intention and your attention goes is what's important. When they say what you focus on expands. But I would also like to say what you don't focus on does not expand, because you have holes and you have leaks and you have all of these things happening. It's like having all of this money come into a tank, but you have all these holes in your tank. And so you're filling it up, pouring all your money in there, your finances, your sweat, your tears, everything. You're just filling it up. And those holes are just leaking out everything that you put in there. And so, peace is expensive. It's because you have to pay attention and you have to give intention to the things that matter. So you need to review. You need to position yourself. You need to allocate. You need to separate things. You need to protect your wealth. And you need to think long term, not just for the moment. I am all about, not deferring your life, because we only got one life to live at the end of the day. Okay. We got this one life to live. That's all we got. And so, for those of you who know me, I'm big on travel, I'm big on experiences and truly living your life. But I'm also big on making sure that you are well positioned. I'm also big on generational wealth. And all of these things together from a holistic standpoint should be working together for you. And so a part of that is your finances, and a part of that is thinking long term and not thinking just for the moment. How could you live today but also have everything in place to live tomorrow, and also have everything in place to make sure your future generations have it a little bit easier, and there's nothing wrong with that. But not just easier, but for them to be well equipped with the information and the knowledge, right? You don't want to just give them money, obviously, but you want them to know what to do with it. And so in order to do that, you also have to educate yourself. You also have to review. You also have to do these things as well. So peace does not happen accidentally. It really does not. It is designed. Okay. And I do this a lot in my private wealth design. Peace is designed. So if today made you realize that income and peace are not the same thing, awesome. That means I did my job. That's exactly why I created the Wealth Table. All right. It's a private capital review room, and it's where we review wealth intentionally. So it's called the Wealth Table because many of us growing up, we didn't have conversations at the table. Okay. We talked about a lot of things. We talked about how we did in school. We talked about hard work. We talked about, like everything under the sun, what's happening on the weekend. We had all of these amazing conversations. Now, don't get me wrong. We talked about having intention. We talked about being hardworking. There was a lot there. There was intention. There was love. There was all of these amazing things at the dinner table, right? And sometimes we didn't even eat dinner at the table every night. Sometimes it was every Sunday or maybe on the holidays. But this was not a part of the norm where we talked about finances. And it's very interesting that that's not what we did, simply because money is something that permeates through the very fabric of society. Like, we use it for everything. It is something that affects our life in so many different ways. And the fact that we did not have conversations about it is a problem. But in wealthier households, that was not the case. Like, money was a subject, a topic, having wine and talking about this and assets and different things like that. And so I really wanted to bring a capital review room in the form of a table, more about conversations that we have about wealth, and not just about talking, about doing as well. And so I created the Wealth Table so that we could review intentionally about finances, liquidity, capital flow, allocation, positioning, long-term stability, things that matter in our lives, things that will elevate our household to higher financial standards, simply because we are taking the time and we are giving this matter attention and intention. And so I wanted to make it, conversation, because the Wealth Table really represents us as a community, whether it's your family or whether it's your community coming together and truly discussing things about finances so that you could start to think differently and you could start to position yourself differently and understand wealth structure and all of that stuff. So it's not about hype at all. Okay, we're talking real scenarios. We're not talking about hustle culture, about just making a bunch of money and doing this and doing that. We're talking about, okay, when you make money, like, what do you do with it? How do you structure yourself? It's structured thinking. And so if you're building something real, if you definitely need structure. And what I mean by that is, if you're building a business, if you're building a life, if you're building anything meaningful, and it's not just for entrepreneurs, it's for everyone who wants to think differently and position themselves differently when it comes to money. And if you want success that you could sleep through, okay? I know we always talk about, making money while you sleep, but how about, also having success that you can also sleep through, not just making money, but actually having the positioning to be able to make sure that we are good financially. So take your seat at the Wealth Table. You definitely have a chair there. I'm excited for those of you who will join me in the Wealth Table. That way we could talk about some things and we could get you structured. All right. So you don't need more income. And I say that, I say it a bit jokingly, because who doesn't need more income, right? If that's crazy. If you don't want to make more, of course you do. And you should, right? But you also need to have more intention as well in the money that you already make. You need to position yourself. And so peace is the goal here, guys. Financial peace is the goal. Structure is the strategy. And, this is something that 2026 should be. It's not that you're going to get everything right and you're going to be perfect, but progress is better than perfect. If you're moving in the right direction, that is the best thing. And when it comes to your wealth, it's just not something that you should hold lightly. It's not something that you should shy away from. And this really allows you to bring that to the forefront and talk about it and learn about it and learn how to structure it. All right. So I'm Kia, your favorite rich auntie. I hope you guys got value today. If you did, definitely let me know, because I love talking about wealth and I love talking about business. Those are and travel. Those are three of my favorite things to talk about. And so, or should I say lifestyle, right? So thank you so much for tuning in. I'm your favorite rich auntie and I will always be rooting for you. Y'all have a wonderful day.